Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to introduce you to my friend, Kelvin Chin. And Kelvin and I got to meet from the IONS group, which is the International Association of Near-Death Studies. And he is an amazing, amazing man. He helps people in so many ways by learning how to reduce stress through meditation and other concepts. And he's been doing meditation, high-level meditation for over 40 years. So Kelvin, I'm so glad to have you here to meet everyone at CCC. And so how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Great to be here with you again, Kathy, and great to meet everybody at CCC. This is great. We'll have an awesome time.
Yeah. Well, we were very interested in having you because of your work with stress and with all the changes, because it's like a change management dream come true for people that like change. What we've been going through for the past 2 years, it's been a constant reevaluation of your values and your thoughts and your belief systems every single day. Almost everything could be a possible trigger. So this is really a gift that you're blessing us with your knowledge, because I'm a big fan. I can't wait for everyone to hear about it. So Kelvin, why don't we start with how you got into all of this, because you started at 19 studying meditation. Do you want to start there and then we can? Okay.
Sure. Yeah, so I started meditating. I learned to meditate, took a class to learn to meditate. When I was 19 years old, I was at Dartmouth College up in New Hampshire. I was very stressed out. That's why I learned. I was very stressed out, highly anxious. I was, in one word, I was desperate for something. And I didn't know what psychotherapy was. If I did, I probably would have gone to a therapist, but I didn't know what it was. The only counselor I knew when I was 19 years old was my guidance counselor in high school. So that's what I knew counseling was. That was the level of sophistication of my knowledge about, mental health. So, but I was in great need and I learned to meditate. And at that time I learned TM, Transcendental Meditation. I studied personally with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi in 1971 and 73. A few years after the Beatles learned and studied with him. And I was an international leader in his organization for about 10 years. It's a good organization, it's a great technique and so forth. They went off in certain directions and I went off and it didn't want to go into all these other directions. I wanted to stay more focused on the meditation. So I've since removed all the cultural, we'll call it the cultural trappings from the teaching, and I've made it even easier. So what I call my meditation now is turning within meditation, but TM's a great technique. So I have nothing negative to say about it, but, and I studied personally with Maharishi, taught with him, spoke with him in his room alone many times and so forth and so on, when I was a national leader of some of the TM organizations overseas.
Well, 40 years is quite a testimonial.
It's actually 50 years now.
Oh my gosh. Well, okay.
How did that happen? I don't know. I'm not old enough to be doing it 50 years, but anyway, yeah.
Well, the thing is that anything that serves so well that you want to do it for any length of time is really probably a huge beneficial tool for us to know about right now, because I'm seeing there's such a huge disparity between the people that are happy with the change or seeing progress and seeing life as in possibility, and the people that are mourning for the old way of doing everything. Are you seeing a lot more people coming to you for stress release?
Oh my goodness. So 4 words I get the most often from people who did find me on the internet, because if they type in anxiety, they relief or anxiety or meditation or whatever, I'm one of the first things that pop up in Google, evidently. And so I'm up to 53 countries now. And the 4 words I hear from people are "you're my last hope." That's it.
Oh. Oh,
they've tried everything, all the traditional modalities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they've spent, lots of time and many times lots of money with these other modalities, and they find me and then I help them. Yeah.
well, see, I think I had this conversation the other day. I think a lot of people are on the treadmill of seeking.
Mm,
And so the thing is if you really want to find find yourself and find the joy, that is what this practice is about. Is that correct?
that's absolutely right. Because if we're highly anxious, then we have all these internal blockages and barriers and so forth to connecting with ourselves. And really, seeking is all about seeking oneself, and it's all about knowing thyself. Well, okay, great. Those are great words and they're great concepts and they're accurate, and it's a great way to articulate it. I use those phrases as well, but the issue is always how. There's lots of people who have the intention to accomplish that. So how do you do that? So that's where the rubber meets the road. And so
Right.
that's what I help people do. Like I say, that's a description of point B. There's lots of people and workshops and books can describe point B. That's where you want to get. Everybody's at point A. How do you get from A to B? That's what you need. That's what I help people do.
Right, right. And the way that you do it makes it easy enough that people can get from A to B,
Right.
because you've refined your process so that it isn't, you don't have to learn another language. You don't have to wear your pajamas.
No, you
You
don't have to
can
shave.
though.
You don't have to shave your head either, Kathy. Even though I do, because I have male pattern baldness. It's not because I want to look like a monk, but And that said, I've taught monks. I've taught Buddhist monks to meditate. I've taught clergy from every religion: Catholic priests, nuns, Muslim imams, Sikhs, rabbis. Who am I leaving out? Ministers, everybody. It doesn't matter. Who they are, what their belief system is. It doesn't matter.
That's fabulous. Yeah, you're an amazing teacher, and I can't wait. I haven't taken your class, but I know Sean got to, so I
Yeah.
definitely want to soon.
Yeah. Yep.
So
You're in line. You're in
yeah,
line.
thank you. So what I wanted to go to the next part of this, because as I said, I met you through the near death community,
Mm.
and I'm a volunteer with that, and I definitely found that you have a unique opportunity. You wrote a book about being not being fearful of death,
Mhm.
and that's going to lead us into our conversation on forgiveness as well. But could you speak to that a little bit too?
Sure. Just real briefly, the seminal event in my life was the death of my mom, and my mom died when she was pretty young, 50, and I was young. I was 29, 30 years old, my third year of law school, and it was very stressful and a very powerful experience, and a very sad experience in many different ways. But out of that came my need to personally confront death and dying because of the loss of somebody very close to me suddenly, and I started helping other people, and that was about 35 years ago. And so I started helping other people. I've since written a book, as you mentioned, Overcoming the Fear of Death.
Mhm.
It's available worldwide. I do the audiobook narration. There's an audiobook, ebook, print book, and so forth. And so that was about 5-6 years ago I wrote that. So that's that's what, and it's a non-religious approach to helping people overcome the fear of death. Everything I do it takes a non-religious approach. So that's,
Right, right,
yeah,
right. Well, but the thing is that what I love about everything that I've seen you do is that it's in service, it's teaching in service of others. And of course, the teacher becomes a student as you're teaching. So it's a
right.
win, 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 win. But you continue to amaze us with all your new work. So the new work that I wanted to talk about tonight is this new book that you wrote about Marcus Aurelius Updated. And Marcus Aurelius is one of the most amazing historical philosophers, if you want. I mean, he was more than a philosopher. He was actually, wasn't he a yeah,
He viewed himself as a philosopher. He did not want to be Roman emperor,
right.
but he viewed he viewed himself his whole life as a philosopher first, and he took on the role as a Roman emperor to serve the people. It was always his view.
Right. And I have friends that quote him all the time. It seems like when I saw that you read this book, it was like, wow, I've got to get a couple copies for people, because I don't know that much about him historically. I just know about his philosophies, and that they're timeless. It's like he had this deep insight about going inside himself and knowing more, which is really your life's work. So do you want to talk a little bit about this, and then how it works with our forgiveness? And
Sure. So like you said, what I resonated with his work and his thinking and so forth, mainly his thinking for many, many, many years. And I saw a resonance and an overlap in our thinking. And so this is really a shout out to Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher, not so much Marcus Aurelius, the emperor. And I start the book out with some of my favorite Marcus Aurelius maxims, we'll call it. They call them meditations, but not like meditation practice, but more meditations like contemplative thought. So I call them maxims also. But he did this as a self-reflective, contemplative practice of his, almost on a daily basis. So he would write. These were written for himself. They were not written for other people. His intention was self-reflection, and but somebody found them historically quickly. Somebody found them in around 800 AD. Collection of these little scraps of parchment or whatever he wrote them on. And then in a few hundred years ago, somebody pulled them together and said, let's call it Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. So now you have 60 or something different versions of it out there, people making commentaries about it and so forth. This is just the first chapter is like a dozen or so of my favorite ones from him. Mainly this book is a collection of my essays, 67 essays that I've written over the last 5 to 8 years on various topics. Many of the topics overlap with what he was fond of writing about almost 2,000 years ago. So I talk about emotions, life principle. There's a chapter on meditation in here. And there's the longer chapter. The longest chapter is the spiritual chapter, which has about 25 or 27 different essays. So I talk about all different subjects in here. Spiritual materialism. I talk about love, which we'll talk about today. I talk about success, suffering, happiness, the balance, ego, grieving, self-interest, self-centered, control, cruelty. We'll talk about today in our discussion. I talk about a lot of different subjects, 67 different essays. So it's really a collection. And if somebody's interested in buying the book, I recommend that you buy the print book, because then you can do this in it. You highlight, you underline, because people, it's really a reference book. That's the way people are looking at it. People who've communicated back with me after they've read it. They look at it as a guidebook, a reference book to help them live life a little bit with less suffering, more happiness. That's always the goal of all my work.
Well, this book also is one of those books that you can say, tell me what I need to know, and it'll open to the right thing for you to read for that day.
Yeah.
Too. So it doesn't have to be read in chronological.
No, in fact, I tell people to look at the table of contents and see what jumps out at them.
Oh, that's okay. Great. Okay, so when I like this action, stop philosophizing about what a good man is and be one.
Right.
Yep.
Yep.
Actions speak louder than words. Yep.
Exactly. Yep. I've been saying the following thing for at least a couple thousand years that I'm aware of. I tell people, control what we can control and let go of what we cannot control, because we cannot control everything.
Right.
You know, one of the fundamental principles I talk about in this book is free will. And people are so quick to forget. They may realize that they have free will, meaning personal choice to make different decisions. But people are so quickly to forget that what about everybody else? Everybody else has free will. So we got 5 billion humans on planet Earth alone now. They get all free, everybody else exercising their free will, not just you or me. So all of that influences us, maybe very indirectly, some more directly, but if there's influences going on all the time. So control, yes, we should control better what we can control, what we have control over, but we need to learn how to let go of what we cannot control. That's the thing. That's where happiness, that's the sweet spot, that balance, that constant tipping and adjustment. That's where happiness resides, I think. And we can talk about forgiveness, you know, in that context.
Right.
You know?
Well, so much of this is how you react to what is. And that can be either a gift so that a trigger is realized, and then you can process it and release the energy charge around it, or it's for you to be the observer, but you have to be in the right state to be able to be peaceful enough to let the play, the action happen, right?
Right. Yeah, that's where the turning within part comes, whether it's Jesus who talked about seek the kingdom of heaven within, or whether it's somebody else who coined the phrase, whoever it was, to say, know thyself, that go within. I call it turning within. Either way, it's the same thing. We need to connect with ourselves and have that inner balance that you're talking about. And then these principles that we're going to talk about today, we can actualize them more readily.
Right. So most people that have done spiritual work at all have heard of the Course in Miracles, or they've heard of Ho'oponopono, where there's these forgiveness practices. And I think you give a whole different vision of it. I mean, the result may be the same, but you have a whole different process. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Sure. The way I think about things, first of all, I think about things through a consistency lens, whether it's about forgiveness and cruelty, which we'll talk about in a minute, or anything. It's all about how can we think about things a little bit more clearly and always to be consistent with no cognitive dissonance. So cognitive dissonance means being inconsistent in our thinking. We may say this, but they don't go together. They need to all go together for everything to really flow, in order to really, and again, my goal always, to reduce our suffering, increase our contentment, our inner peace in life.
Repeat that again, please.
Which part?
Reduce our suffering.
To reduce our suffering and increase our contentment and inner peace in life.
Yeah.
That's always the goal of everything I do. So let's talk about this idea of forgiveness. So I think many people have a misplaced view, or a slightly, like a little bit of skew the view. It's not fully aligned, and it really needs to be aligned in order for us to really be able to forgive. So let's talk about what forgiveness is not, because the way most people view it. So most people are thinking, well, first of all, what are we typically thinking of when we're forgiving something? Is something didn't go right, or somebody didn't treat us properly, or whatever.
Right.
You know, that's typically, there's a problem, okay? And I think about it a little bit differently, I think, than most people. Most people are thinking, oh, I got to forgive them. How am I going to forgive them? They did such a bad thing to me. I can't give them a hall pass. You know that phrase, the hall pass? Those of you who are not old enough, back when I was in high school anyway, you had to have a hall pass to go to the bathroom, and the teacher had to give you a pass. So why are you in the hall? You shouldn't be in the hallway. Oh, I got a pass. I'm going to the bathroom. Oh, okay, you can go. So that kind of thing. People incorrectly, I think of forgiveness as giving the bad person who treated you poorly a pass, a hall pass. No, I say, first of all, get rid of that idea. That's not the way I think of forgiveness anyway. So I'm going to suggest that we think about forgiveness in a slightly different way. Why? Because I think of forgiveness in the form of two words. Forgiveness to me is moving forward.
Right.
Moving forward. That's what forgiveness is about. Can we move forward with that relationship? If it's an external, or even with ourselves. Sometimes we need to forgive ourselves. That means moving forward with whatever we're not happy about that we may have done ourselves, either ourselves to somebody else or ourselves to ourselves. So it's not a hall pass. And the other thing that it's not forgetting. So this whole idea, you've heard this notion, people say, forgive and forget. Get rid of that. Wrong, wrong, wrong. It's completely a mistake. I don't know who came up with this. Now, I understand what they may have meant by it, but English is a language, and we need to use English words that have common meaning. That's what's called communication, okay? And now I'm not a word, crazy person about every little word, but certain words really do carry power to them. And
Right.
This is one of them, this forgive and forget, that carries a lot of power, and it's a lot of full of mistakes. We never, ever forget. That's reality. And everybody knows this from your own personal experience. I'm not telling you anything new, but get rid of that phrase, because you know that nobody ever forgets. The issue is, can we forgive and move forward? We're
Right.
never going to forget. So I think we need to accept the fact that we never forget, and that forgetting is not going to hold, or remembering, in other words, not forgetting, remembering is not going to hold us back from forgiving. That's why I say get rid of this forgive and forget idea. All right.
Okay.
So that's really what they mean by it when whoever came up with this forgive and forget thing, but say so. Use English words that are accurate. I think this is where Marcus Aurelius and I really resonate with each other in terms of that. You see all kinds of maxims from him saying basically what I just said in terms of use words that mean what you're saying. Because here's the thing, understanding affects attitude, attitude affects our beliefs, beliefs affect our thoughts and our emotions. And if we are misaligned in any of those, there we create suffering for ourselves. So I'll repeat that. Understanding, attitude, beliefs, thoughts, emotions, and maybe suffering if it's not aligned. If there's not, that's where the discord is. We need to get rid of discord in our thinking. So that's what Marcus's big thing was like, let's get our thinking aligned. Our thinking aligned. We're not doing away with our emotions, but we're not only acting emotionally without thinking. They go hand in hand. It's not, this is where Stoicism, I think, gets a bad rap. Marcus Aurelius is considered one of the most famous Stoic philosophers. He studied Stoicism, so he didn't, create this idea of Stoic philosophy. But I think it gets a bad rap because people think, whoa, you're not emotional, not emotional. No. It's about not being overly emotional at the expense of thinking clearly with your intellect. So he would tell you, no, it's both. They work together and they work hand in hand. So back to this idea of forgiveness, moving forward. The other component to this idea of forgiveness that we need to cover is love. And what is the definition of love? So first we'll take off the table any definitions that only exclusively include a feeling of romantic love. All right? That's a subset of what I'm going to say. Okay. It's not the overarching umbrella. The overarching umbrella, the way I can think about love, is the same way Jesus thought about love. He said, and a lot of people, some people may know about this, a lot of people, it's been kind of unfortunately not made in the forefront. So I'm trying to bring it out to the forefront again. His definition was accepting the other person for who they are, not who you wish they were. Right. That was his definition of love. So what's another word in English for that is acceptance. So that's accepting the other person for who they are, not who you wish they were. Now, we need to draw clear distinctions within that, however, and he did that. And this is not so clearly outlined in the Bible, but we need to draw very clear distinctions within that, because we're accepting the other person for who they are inside. We're not necessarily accepting their behavior. In this forgiveness idea, if it's bad behavior, we still retain the ability, the power, the free will to reject the bad behavior, but we're accepting that that's who they were at that moment. that element of love is still part and parcel of forgiveness if you think of love that way. If you think about love in any other way, you start to have discord and rubbing, and things they start rubbing each other, these concepts, but they completely fit together if you understand love that way. Love is accepting the other person for who they are, not who you wish they were. That means you're not trying to change them into somebody who they're not. That's what that means. Okay.
So I have a question about how we've been told, or it's part of the spiritual paradigm, I guess you want to say, that we create everything in our experience, that like attracts like, and the frequencies. So part of forgiveness is forgiving ourselves, right? It's not, I mean, because if you attracted someone to do something to you, how do you deal with that?
So here's the thing. So I first, let's talk about this attraction idea.
Okay.
And there's an essay in here called, do we manifest everything in our lives?
Okay.
It's actually the last essay that I put in this book, and I wrote it right before I published this book. So I wrote it in 2021, because this book came out in March 2021. I wrote that essay, I think January, February, and I stuck it in
to
my editor. And the reason is, can we manifest things in our life? Page 182. The reason I put it in is because one of my students, Crystal, she said, hey, can you talk about this? I said, that's great. I'm missing that in here. Here's the thing. Can we manifest things in our life? We manifest everything in our lives. It's not that we manifest one thing or some things. Everything in our life we manifest based on who we are. But the issue isn't that. The issue is, do we have control over manifestation of everything in our life? No, because if people who say that forget, again, this goes back to something I talked about at the beginning of our conversation tonight, which is people forget that it's not just about them all the time. It's about their free will. What about the other billion people who have free will? Now, I understand it's more likely your family and friends who are going to have more of a direct influence. Their choices are going to have more of a direct influence on your life than some government leader in Ethiopia, whoever, whatever, or somebody driving a car in Mumbai. But they do have an influence on your life, because the carbon emissions that their car is driving in Mumbai, it could be affecting the ozone layer over your house in Kansas. I don't know.
Well, it's also the oneness concept, that we are all one, and that their consciousness is part of our consciousness. And but what I was talking about is the frequency.
Yeah. So here's the thing. I would say, are we connected? Do we influence each other? Absolutely, yes. No question about it. So, but we're not one consciousness that can't think for itself, for herself. We each think for ourselves. So I have a phrase that I use. I call it, we are each sovereign entities. Each mind, each consciousness, each soul is an individual sovereign as in has its own, makes its own choices and so forth. And yes, we are part of a whole, in the sense of we influence each other, and we connect, and we can connect. Look, I've had thousands of experiences in the 51 years I've been meditating now of feeling incredible connection with everything animate and inanimate in the universe.
Right.
So, but that doesn't mean that I've lost my individuality. Right. And so I retain my individuality along with the experience of that incredible connection with everything in the universe. So those ideas, I think, have aspects of accuracy in them, but sometimes are a little bit cognitively off. But so the problem with that is it can create suffering. And that's why I try to clarify things.
Right. Okay. So when in this chapter, do you feel like you've gotten a clear way for people to understand?
Let's talk about
right at the end of the chapter, it has 10 spiritual red flags.
Oh, you're talking about that?
Well, you said, well, we're we're basically talking about forgiveness, and we're talking about what's my role in the forgiveness.
Yeah,
And
well,
so,
my role, let me give you 4 examples. So
okay,
the examples that I give in the essay on nuances of forgiveness kind of sum this up.
okay,
And,
good.
and it'll give you a good idea of where your role is. Because your role, first of all, each of us are decision makers. And that's what I mean when we are sovereign minds and that we each have free will. We make decisions. So, and as Marcus Aurelius and I have said for thousands of years, why not take control over those decisions that we can make and make better decisions? That's the idea. So the 4 degrees of forgiveness are, the first degree is the easy one. It's like somebody calls me Kevin and my name is Kelvin. And they leave me out. I grew up in Boston. I was born in Boston, Irish Catholic. You think I wasn't called Kevin a gajillion times growing up? My elementary school teacher, who should be able to, my new teacher, my new whatever, grade whatever teacher, should be able to read the name list,
Right.
K-E-L. Oh, Kevin Chin. Okay, great. So I had to correct him. So that's first level forgiveness, because I'm like, I don't even notice it half of the time.
Right. Hey,
So
you works.
it's like, yeah, I can move on from it. So am I accepting the other person for who they are
Yeah.
at the time? Yes. Do I care about really what they say? Not really. That's really easy first level degree of forgiveness. I move on from it. Okay. Second degree of forgiveness is somebody says something and maybe they embarrass me and they say something private in a public setting that they shouldn't say. And that does bother me. So this is a higher degree, okay? Now, I'm accepting them for who they are. So this is Jesus' definition of love, accepting them for who they are, not trying to change them.
Right.
That doesn't mean I can't educate them. No, that also, right?
Okay. Okay.
So I go to the person, I say, look, you said that thing, that was really private, man. Please don't say, that's not cool. But it's not like huge, all right?
Right.
It's not huge. So I can move on from that fairly easily, all right? But let's say that somebody says something really like outrageous, all right? And then I go to them, I say, hey, that's really not cool. You don't talk about, your part. This is true story. I used to work in law firms, and I would go to some of the partners sometimes and say, afterwards, I say, you don't ever berate your partner in front of a client again. You don't do that, okay? Now they're on notice. Now that partner who screwed up and did that in front of the client, our client,
Right.
our multi-million-dollar client, is on notice. You don't do that. That's third level. That's more intense, okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
But you're still moving forward and you're retaining the relationship. They're on notice now.
Right.
Fourth level, the 4th degree out of the 4 is see you later. You're abused in a relationship. You're accepting the other person for who they are, not their behavior. Remember, we said that earlier. You're accepting them. You're not trying to change them into some other person because you've already tried that on the 3rd level and it didn't work. And they've been on notice and then now they're continuing to abuse you. See you later. So you walk from that. That's still forgiving. All right. Because why? Forgiving is about moving forward with ourselves in our lives. We may not, that doesn't mean moving forward with that relationship that's abusive. That means you have to honor yourself and you've communicated with the person clearly before and they violated that, okay? And they've abused you. And then you've put them on notice and you're not trying to change them. That's where the love comes in, that you're not trying to change who they are. If they're an abusive person and you finally recognize that, it's completely appropriate to move forward and forgive by moving forward and leaving the relationship.
Was that kind of like time heals all wounds? You leave it and then it's not activated anymore? No, it's not.
No, it's not going to heal. You're not going to forget. You're going to forget that person, you're not going to forget that person abused you. So no, it's not, time doesn't heal all wounds. Time sometimes heals wounds, but it doesn't always. Sometimes you're still feeling the pain from that experience, but you're moving on from it. You're not continuing to subject yourself to that source of pain. That's forgiving moving forward. That's accepting the other person and for who they were, not trying to change them, right? And that's self-love that I talk about in this last paragraph. I'll read it to you. Moving on in this way would perhaps be a way to demonstrate not only our respect and love for ourselves, the ultimate in self-love, but also showing our maturity as a soul, living with and relating to other souls in our many and varied relationships throughout our lives, a demonstration to ourselves and to the world that nothing is perfect. That relationship may not be perfect. Nothing is perfect, nor does anything last forever. So moving on may be the appropriate and healthy thing to do. We need to acknowledge this and in our behavior, not just when we go to the workshop and we walk out and we're spouting these aphorisms.
That's right. That's right. Tomorrow I get to interview a lady who was a survivor from the bombing of the Boston Massacre, Boston Marathon.
Yep.
And she went through so much to be able to forgive. And so, you know, that's why I was asking if there was time, or it's really a decision that you make where you don't leave part of your essence back in that story, right?
Exactly.
You're not dragging the past with you.
Exactly. And now there's grief and grieving involved in that sometimes too. Yep. That's a separate issue. That's a separate discussion, and I talk about in separate essays in the book. And that's a separate discussion from this forgiving. I'm trying to keep things fairly siloed, although they do overlap in real life. And so silo the understanding, and then we can, if we understand them well in their silos, then we can apply them and overlap them in our actual real life.
Right. Well, that's what I love about your work is I feel it is applicable. Everything I've experienced from you is it hasn't been theory. It's been really usable. And okay, so for forgiveness, how do you see this time period right now that we're going through? Because energetically, 2022 is going to be coming any minute. I mean, this whole year went so fast, but we've just been in constant chaos and a high contrast. That's all I can say. So you first of all get aligned with yourself. You meditate twice a day for a short amount of time. Get centered. And really are more aligned with who you really are and how you experience the world. So you in touch with your feelings, you actually use them as your emotions as your guide to how to be in the world, correct?
It's a constant, trial and error. Yeah, we check in with ourselves, we go with our gut feeling, our intuition, our emotions, so forth. And is it working? We always need to check. We don't just blindly follow our emotions. That's the thing. So we check and is it working? Great. Okay, good.
Okay, good. Well, I've seen miracles happen with people that have done your work. I've seen them turn into calm, cool, and collected out of story. And that's been a delight to watch. It's really amazing. So do you feel like we want to go on from forgiveness to cruelty and conscious love?
Yeah, let's talk about that because it relates to, they all relate to each other. So cruelty, I define as somebody's cruel when they get enjoyment out of causing unhappiness, suffering in other people. That's a cruel person. That's cruel behavior. And so we know it when we see it, all right, or we feel it. And now, first of all, let's just step back and say that everybody, we've all been cruel at some point in our lives. Everybody. Now, maybe not really cruel, capital C cruel, but we have hurt other people in our lives at times. We all have. And we've all had these missteps. So nobody's perfect is my point. Me, not anybody. But the thing is, what can we do to catch that if we're a conscious, self-aware being? And then what do we do with the people who are not consciously and not self-aware? So first, the easy part with the consciously self-aware people are that we see that, we recognize it for what it is, and then what do? We need to either get some blood sugar going because we haven't eaten in 12 hours or whatever it is, and we're cranky, so it's a minor level of cruelty and bad behavior, and we're snippy at somebody. Or we really need to take a break because we're burnt out and we've working too hard, and we're really biting people's heads off. It's a little bit a higher level. Well, okay, we who are self-aware can catch ourselves, and then what we need to do is turn inside and balance. Whatever technique balances you, that's what you need to do, because cruel behavior comes from what? Here's the background on cruel behavior. If you think about it, cruel behavior comes from somebody at the time, and it may be you, it may be me at that moment, who's not feeling balanced, not feeling completely foundationally secure and balanced inside at that moment. Okay, now for some people the moment lasts for days and weeks and months and years, but let's just say we're talking about the self-aware person. Okay, for that moment they're not balanced. Okay, fine, then what do we need to do? Well, obviously we need to balance. So whatever balancing technique is going to work is going to do that, because that's what's going to increase our self-confidence and self-esteem. Because the person who is out of balance and starting to exhibit what we're calling cruel behavior here, does it to depress other people around them, because then they feel better. If you take other people around you and you depress them, if you're feeling depressed yourself and you just depress, you make other people feeling worse than you do, as compared to what? You feel better. So it's really kind of, it makes logical sense for why that happens. And you'll see it, if you think about it that way, it makes sense. And you'll see it all, wow, that person really needs to take a break, or that person needs to get a meal or whatever. Now, the people who are personality-wise, however, and their personality traits, it's almost like embedded in their personality, this kind of cruel behavior, it takes a while, much longer time for somebody like that to finally have the realization, because it has to be a self-realization. It can't be, you could mention something to somebody, but usually it falls on deaf ears. If they're that cruel, then their narcissism is so strong. Based on what? Based on their inner insecurity is so deep that their technique of depressing people around them has worked for so many years for them successfully, because everybody goes, oh, Mr. So-and-so or Ms. So-and-so. I was bullied by women. It's not just men. I was bullied by women at one of my jobs. And that's all I'm going to say. I don't want to identify who it is. But, many years ago. And thing is, it's like, you kind of go, oh, okay, yeah, I'll do what you want. That's what they want. And it works for them. And so why would they stop doing it? They would only stop doing it if they had the realization that they're making a universe around themselves of incredibly miserable people, more and more. So that's a tough sell, okay? And only they can see that. They have to have that realization themselves. The easier fix is those of us who are more self-aware. We catch ourselves and then we shore ourselves up from the inside.
Okay,
right?
So let's use that example of you working where and all of us have had a bad boss or someone be incredibly disrespectful or highly competitive when you're supposed to be team working. And that's another question for you're being the observer and you're seeing it, but you're also in it. Is that where you would step out and get away from this situation, or you can't really, you can let it not affect you by rationalizing?
So really, it depends. You have to apply those 4 degrees of nuances of forgiveness. So depending where you are, you apply them, and in that given situation. I wish I knew this back then, but anyway, I didn't come up with this thing. And I apply it to myself. You apply that, and then if it's really bad, you walk away. And that's what I ended up doing. I ended up leaving and getting a different job and so forth and so on. Yeah. So sometimes you need to do that. Because you can't change the other person's behavior. That's their free will to be a jerk. It's like, and I, you do what you can to try to educate them to see that you're just creating a miserable environment for people, but then they go, yeah, and then maybe they change a little bit and then they go right back. So it's like at some point you have to individually decide how much is enough is enough.
Right. Well, that's the self-love part.
Yes, absolutely.
If you consider that your journey and learning curve is one of the most valuable things you have, that's the only reason you came into physical being, and then and you aren't going to be able to learn anything in that environment because if it's oppressive, then you need to keep going.
Yeah, I mean, who's responsible for my happiness? This person is. Okay. Yeah. So that it's always this person, we each, and that's not selfish, that's self-interest. So I have essays about that concept.
Yes.
People, that's a mistake. A lot of people in spiritual communities, they say, oh, I don't want to be there doing this because I'm being selfish. No, you need to take care of yourself. Not taking care of yourself is being selfish if you really think about it, because if you don't take care of yourself, then you start sucking energy from other people. That's selfish.
Right.
So self-interest is really important.
Well, this is really a great segue to conscious love, because self-love is the path to, it's not enlightenment necessarily, but it is the opportunity to connect to the mystical side of yourself is through self-love. And we really, there's probably thousands of books on how to how to love yourself. I helped an author who wrote a beautiful book on self-talk, and that's a great way to start the self-love, is see what you're saying to yourself, because that's under your control, right? So what do you mean when you say conscious love?
When I mean conscious love, I mean a couple of different things. First of all, it's let's work backwards and talk about what you just said.
Okay.
First of all, conscious love to me reflects the idea that when we're talking about self-love, that means accepting everything about ourselves. That's what self-love means. It doesn't mean you just love the great stuff about you. Oh, my hair is done. If I had hair, you know what I mean? Oh, look at my mustache. I was like, oh, such a handsome guy. Whatever. There, yeah. But what about when you're not feeling so great about yourself? That embracing of who we are, what I call sometimes in my essays and in my talks, I say we got to embrace our warts too. The stuff we don't like about ourselves, or whether it's emotional or personality wise, whatever. Sometimes people, they don't like the way they laugh because they cackle when they laugh. Like, whatever, that's your laugh, okay? It's your signature. It's like, people either love you for who you are or they don't. And if they don't love you for who they are, they're not your friends. Right. That's another iteration of what Jesus describes as loving the other person for who they are, not who you wish they were. Oh, I wish they didn't laugh like that. Well, do you want to be friends with the person or not? That's part of that goes, their laugh comes with it. All right. So that to me, self-love is very nitty-gritty stuff. And it sounds obvious to people, but when people go to, let's see, people put it into practice, that's where the rubber meets the road.
Right.
People can talk about this idea of self-love and so forth and so on. But, the acid test is, are you accepting all parts of yourself, not just the stuff that looks good in the mirror?
So you're talking about the shadow and integrating the shadow and being aware of the shadow of yourself, your personality.
See, I don't think of it as shadow, because to me, shadow implies non-shadowness. And to me, that implies that there is a state of perfection. And so I've talked about that at length in here in different essays about this state of perfection, where the idea of perfection came about 10,000 years ago from some of these beings who I've communicated with. Some of the people don't know that I communicate with.
I know you do. We'll talk about that a little bit if we can sneak.
And so the bottom line is, it's a theory. This idea of perfection, it's not reality. So everybody, if we're eternal souls, which is my experience, that we are eternal beings. Eternal means no beginning, no end. That means As Woody Allen said, eternities are a really long time, especially near the end. But no, there is no end. So we always have an opportunity to learn more about the universe, about ourselves, about everything. And so if that's the case, shadow to me is irrelevant. What I recognize and accept about myself is that I'm not perfect and nobody else is. And nobody else is.
Right.
Now, do I surround myself with people who are cruel in that way? We'll call that level or degree of, we'll call it imperfection.
Okay.
No, because I want to have friends who are kind and so forth and so on. So there is a level of self-awareness and self-knowledge that I surround myself with. That's a choice, okay?
Right.
But it doesn't mean that I need to seek perfection. That's the thing. And so to me, that is a slippery slope down the road of suffering, because I can't tell you how many people I knew in the 1970s who believed that, and they bought that line and sinker, and they've been meditating for 50, 60, 70 years, some of them now, every day, never missed a meditation. And their life isn't what they would consider perfect.
Right. Oh, that's horrible. That sounds like hell.
Yes.
In purgatory, your own personal version. Well, we assume that we wouldn't even be here if we were in perfection, because we'd be back in non-physical.
Well, that's what some people think. I think that the non-physical is not perfect either. So my experience being, because I have many experiences, as you know, being on the other side, and I can go to the other side without having a near-death experience, even though I've had a near-death experience. I can go there now without having a near-death experience. And so my experience is a mind is a mind is a mind, whether it has a physical biological body attached to it or not. It's a mind, and all minds are eternal. And that means that there is no plateau called perfection. And that means that all minds are inherently growing. I don't like the word imperfect, but growing and developing if they choose to be, because we know many minds choose not to. They just like, I just want a beer. I'm just getting drunk. The whole lifetime I'm getting, that's it. I'm hanging out in the saloon. Okay.
So well, okay. So the reason why I talked about the shadow is that I think that there's potency in integration. And when people think, that was why I used that, and of course that's just a commonplace term.
Sure.
But the idea is integrating and loving as much of yourself as you are capable allows you to be in a place of loving others. Without that, you really can't offer it outside, or and I think of things a lot of times in frequency. We are not really talking frequency.
Sure, we can talk frequency another time, but
but the idea is that the resonance, when you're talking about cognitive dissonance or dissidence, that's when the notes aren't all aligned. But when we're in congruency,
resonance, congruence,
resonance.
So the thing is, so if the bottom line, I'll distill what you just said down to this one sentence. If we don't take care of ourselves first and balance ourselves, we are being fraudulent, quite frankly, in our expression of how much we care about everybody else and so forth and so on. If we are a mess inside ourselves, it's just verbiage, it's just words. We're not coming from a place of what some people refer to as being genuine inside. It's because our external is a reflection of our internal world, and how we interact and treat our external world is a direct reflection of how we treat ourselves internally. So this goes to another aspect of this idea of conscious love, which is this whole notion of unconditional love. And to me, unconditional love is like saying love, because love is unconditional. To say unconditional love is saying love, because
like shrimp scampi.
What do you? I love you conditionally. You. That's what it implies that your other love is conditional love. I say no, that's conditional liking. But love is accepting the other person for who they are, not who you wish they were. There's no conditions in that definition that Jesus said. No conditions. He would walk the streets and he accepted everybody. He knew who they were. If they were a snake, personality-wise, the human being was a snake personality-wise, he recognized who that was, who they were.
Right.
He didn't try to change that person from being. Did he educate? Yes. Was it that person's then free will choice to listen and be educated? Yes. But did he try to push his teachings on other people? No. So that's love. That's accepting the other person for who they are. Unconditionally. There is no such thing as conditional love. So everything is unconditional love.
Okay. So love. Conscious love is a love you choose.
Yes. I think the conscious is directed love, right? Is directing our acceptance of whoever they are, or whether ourselves. Same with ourselves. It can be internal or externally directed. Yeah.
Okay. So the idea of integrating as much as you can into yourself in a loving way, forgiving, and not leaving pieces of your your essence in other people's it's almost people used to say when you're in a relationship, the person shows up with a carry-on or a steamer trunk.
Yeah, right. Baggage, lots of baggage. Yeah.
So it's like you don't want that steamer trunk anymore. If you have the carry-on, you can still keep working on that. But...
Exactly. Nobody's going to have no luggage, but the issue is it a steamer? Is it 16 steamer trunks, or is it something manageable?
Yeah. Well, the reason why I was asking about that, because the conscious love that I feel we're evolving to right now, that's what we had to have, the slow down and stop and reevaluation that we've been under in the past 2 years, and then have it show up as a conscious choice to pick something better, co-create something better for the future. Right?
So is there a question there?
Well,
so that's a choice. That's a choice. What you're describing is a choice that humanity has. Right. And that's a choice that each human being has. Right? Right. Right. And so what am I doing? I'm encouraging people to make more conscious choices that are in their self-interest, and showing them how in their self-interest they can make choices that are in their self-interest that are also consistent with other people's self-interest. That's where the rubber meets the road, because everybody's self-interested, but do people look to see where the overlap of the Venn diagram is? That's where the lesson, that's where the life learning is, if we really want to see a change in a large group of people.
So one question that we have from Jesse is for you, Kelvin, isn't the mind non-existent?
Well, when I use the word mind, you can substitute the word consciousness, soul, spirit, awareness. So I'm working across 53 countries, religions, and cultures. A lot of times people don't speak English for their first or second or language, and sometimes it's their third or fourth language, English. So I use easy to understand language. And so when I use the word mind, I mean not just our conscious waking state part of our mind, what I sometimes refer to as the 8-inch plastic bucket part of our mind, but also the vastness of our mind, because our mind is not segmented into different parts. You can study different parts of the mind in a workshop or a psychology class, and it makes it easy to be tested on if you're in a psychology program, I suppose. Tell us about the ego. Tell us about the id. Tell us about this, and let's talk about your emotions of this, that way. Okay, fine. That works in an academic setting, is what I'm saying, or in a workshop. But we all experience our minds as fluid, organic experience. Consciousness is fluid. it's not experienced in this way and this way. Oh, now I'm talking to you intellectually. Oh, hold on a second. I got to change how I'm thinking. And now I'm expressing an emotion. Oh, it's not like that. It's a fluid experience. So that's why I like to use the word mind, even with my all English speaking audiences as well, because that's how I view our mind. And so I'm not sure what the person means. Maybe they need to explain it a little bit more clearly when they say their mind doesn't exist.
I think we're mostly mind. This body's just a little costume we put on.
Look at my experience, my memories go back 6,000 years, being born and choosing to come in, and I have memories of soul plans being discussed on the other side, so forth and so on. That's before I had a physical body. So that's my mind. You want to call that spirit, soul, consciousness? I'm okay with that. To me, they're all synonyms, but it's not mind. It is mind. We're either mental or, we're mental, and now I'm mental and physical. I have a biological, physical body, but I also talk about on the other side, when we biologically die, I now talk about it biologically, because we don't have a biological body on the other side, but we still have a body. We have an energy body. And so a physicist would say that is a physical body from a physics standpoint. I get it. Most people aren't going to understand that nuance, but it's accurate. That's why I say we don't have a physical biological body on the other side, but we have an energy body. It's identifiable.
Sheila, would you like to jump in here? You have a question?
Well, yeah, one of the things you talked about a couple times was the 4 levels of forgiveness. And I was just wondering where I could delve into that a little more deeply.
So that's what I talk about that in my book. In its one of the essays is an entire essay on it. And so just to be crystal clear, I call the nuances of forgiveness, and I talk about them as degrees of forgiveness. So I don't talk about them as steps or levels, although you could look at it that way. It's not incorrect, but I like the idea of degrees, because nothing is absolutely black and white. Oh, it stopped, and now you got this one. You know what I mean? Life is, as I just said, fluid. We experience a fluidity in life, and even the degree to which we let go and move forward. Sometimes it's clear. Okay, I move forward. Other times it's like, there are degrees of it, and it's more like a rheostat, a dimmer switch, on a light switch. It's okay. At what point are you at number 8 on the dial? You know what I mean? It's not crystal clear. It's more like there are no numbers on the dial, and sometimes forgiveness is very similar that way. So that's why I like the idea, the word choice that I made specifically of degree, but you could think of it as levels or steps. And somebody mentioned in a private text to me in the chat room, we were talking about during the recording about steps. And yes, if you're talking about one relationship, for example, then you could apply those different degrees, what I call degrees in that essay, as steps. You could step it up, for example. And I don't know if Julie's on right now, if Julie and I were chatting privately, if you want to share whatever you want to share about how this idea of these degrees and so forth helped you in that real life, very thorny, we'll call it, situation. Julie, you here?
I'm trying to, there we go. I couldn't unmute. Do you want me to tell a story?
Yeah, whatever you want. It's up to you. You tell whatever you want. Yeah.
So it's a little complicated, but I'll try to be as brief as I can. I lost my granddaughter and my daughter 20 years ago, and then my daughter died 19 years ago. She served in the United States Army, and my daughter was buried in the family cemetery plot with my parents. And 7 years ago, my siblings made a collective decision that she did not deserve to be buried there any longer because they did not agree with her military service and some other life decisions she had made. So they proposed to me, well, not was it a proposal, it was a demand that she had to be moved. And initially, of course, Kelvin knows this whole story, and he's helped me more than 1,000 years in therapy have throughout this whole process. Initially, I was so angry, I was seething, because in my heart, I said to myself, they can't do this to you. And it's been a situation from childhood. I have a different father than they did. So it was kind of a combination of a lot of things. Well, anyway, I kind of dropped it, thinking you're never going to pursue this. How in the world could I move her after so many years? And so they let it go for a while, and then it was resurrected again, no pun intended, 2 years ago, and they brought me to court over it because I would not agree to move her. And push came to shove, and I didn't know what to do, so I went to the Attorney General's office. And because my daughter was a decorated veteran, and because she also made history, she was the first woman to serve at the 3rd Infantry, which is the old guard, if none of you are familiar with the Army hierarchy. The judge said, no, we are going to move a decorated soldier to Arlington. Well, they first said they wanted her out of the cemetery she was at, but then when the judge proposed the solution, they said, no, she doesn't deserve that either. We just want her in a local cemetery, whatever.
Thanks.
Yeah, yikes. And so they assigned a law firm to represent me, to defend my daughter, really, not me. And when the judge ruled in my daughter's favor, she was finally buried this past February, 19 years after she died, with full military honors. I mean, I felt like Jackie Kennedy must have felt the day that her beloved was buried at Arlington. So when I talked to Kelvin about it, and at that point, when now it has been resolved, it is finished, as Jesus said, I thought, okay, now what do I do? How do I get back in the good graces of my siblings? How do I forgive them? And I just could not figure out how to do this, because my history with that concept was to forget it. I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. And so many times when I would ask Kelvin about this, what I felt was that if I couldn't forgive them, or if I couldn't forget about it, then I really wasn't forgiving. And then when I've read both of Kelvin's books and been on some of his classes and lectures, he helped me understand that sometimes there is a relationship that cannot be salvaged. It cannot be reconciled. And that's what I think was so difficult for me to accept, is that, oh, I have to stay in the family somehow. Helping me to discern that to really step away permanently from this cruelty. And I felt that's what it was. I don't know if all of you will see it like that, but that's how I felt that it was, that for you to force a mother to move a child from sacred ground. Once I finally accepted that this relationship with any of them, with the three of them, was doing more harm than good, I finally then was at peace with the whole situation. And that took an awful lot, but Kelvin's ideas and his theory and his connection to not only his profound compassion and wisdom, but the connection that reflection that he always says about Jesus is that he expects us to love people just the way they are. I wanted to change all three of them. I wanted to change all three of them into somebody that was more compassionate or more loving or not so mean. And I finally realized I don't have the ability. how codependent is that? I mean, that's like a t-shirt to end all t-shirts. But I don't think I compromised anything. I think I finally was able to get a peaceful experience out of that whole difficult situation.
Thank you for sharing that, Julie. I want to share, that was very powerful stuff. Thanks for sharing all the details with everybody. You know, I want to share something personal that kind of dovetails with what Julie is saying about her, what I helped her through. And the reason I was able to help you, Julie, is because I've been through something similar, not with a child or anything like that, but with myself and my own, let's say, desire to help other people, which I think is a great desire for us to have. I'm not saying we should give that up, but the issue is, I'm going to just talk about myself. This is when I was younger, in my 20s, you know, and I started teaching meditation worldwide almost 50 years ago now. And what was my motivation? Was my motivation to change them or to help them? There's a difference. There's a very subtle difference, and it's a huge, important difference to understand and to be aware, to be aware of about oneself. This is, you know that phrase, know thyself. This is like maybe the biggest know thyselfness about me that I'm sharing with you, I'm disclosing with you right now, is that was, I was helping people, but I wanted to change them. And I was very good at persuading people. You know what a close ratio means in sales? I had a very, very high close ratio when I was giving a lecture to somebody about meditation. Now, I don't persuade anybody to change. I don't persuade people to take my meditation class, take my afterlife classes, to read my books, nothing. It's this, I'm available. And people know that I'm available. And then if there's interest there, then they'll ask me questions. If somebody asks or expresses a need, then I feel a responsibility to respond. But I'm not going out of my way to market myself to people who are not interested. That is, to me, stepping on somebody else's, what I've come to language for myself, I'm stepping on somebody else's free will toes. They have the free will to not want to improve themselves. And that's what I helped share with Julie about her siblings. And that's their choice, to be mean and mean-spirited and be conflicting and then they expressed conflicting feelings themselves. Sometimes they're really nice, and then all of a sudden they're not. It's like, how much of this whiplash can you take? You know, you got to be, so at some point you need to decide for yourself in this forgiveness discussion that we're having, how much of this relationship is beneficial for me. And if it's not, if the calculus is such that it's really not feeding me, nurturing me in that way, then moving on is as good a choice as any. And it's embracing them in a loving way, in the way Jesus said, the way Julie texted to me during the talk tonight. She said, not trying to change who they are. That was the essential message. Jesus's definition of love, not trying to change who they are, accepting them for who they are. That doesn't mean accept their behavior, but you're accepting their essence. And the essence at that time may be very unhealthy, but you're not trying to change them, because if you start to try to change people, they feel that, and then they will start to they'll feel inner resistance with themselves, and then they'll start to disrespect you because of your trying to change them. So it's a fine line. It's not always a really clear black and white line there, because sometimes people will implicitly ask for help, and it seems like they're asking for help, So you start offering them help, and then they put up a big wall. People are not clear about this within themselves. So I'm not suggesting that this is absolutely an easy decision to make, but for me, the self-reflection, the epiphanous moment for me was to realize that everybody has free will, not just me.
Perfect.
Sounds obvious, but
Yes.
the rubber meets the road in real life, day to day.
So Cal, we have a couple questions here.
Yeah.
Judah, do you want to go ahead and?
Sure, I can go next.
Okay.
I have a second.
I love your background.
Yeah, it seemed appropriate. Yeah, this one right here is Marcus Aurelius, and over here is Simon Legree.
Oh, cool. That's right.
So I really appreciate the fact that you are trying to bring Marcus Aurelius into the 21st century. In my own work, I'm working to do something similar with Thomas Paine's and the ideals from the Enlightenment.
Interesting.
So I really acknowledge and admire what you're doing there. So I have a question around free will and this idea of changing people or just letting them be as they are. There are folks in the world through what I label as authority addiction are compelled to make other people be the same mindset as they have. And lately we're seeing a rise in totalitarianism in the world, which is exactly that, what you described as putting other people down so you feel better about yourself, or we feel.
Yep.
My I statements here. And when someone isn't going to give me a choice and they're pointing a gun at me, I'm committed to nonviolence. So, all right, if it comes to it, if I'm Marcus Aubrey, I guess I die. But there has to be, what happens in social movements? If we had not resisted the Nazis, what would the world be like today? And so these raises some questions. When you have people, fine, you have your free will, but when you violate my free will, at what point can I not walk away anymore?
And
then what do I do?
Yeah, those are internal issues based on your own values. And each person has their own values, and each group of people may have their own values, or family, whatever group you're talking about.
I'm talking about social, broad, global, national mass movements.
Yeah, so what about it? So
we have mass movements that are pushing to eradicate individual responsibility and freedom, to have things their way so they can get away with whatever they want.
Right.
And my judgment is that violates, you talked about how that harms them behaving that way. And, maybe someday they'll wake up to seeing the effect they have. But meanwhile, what about those of us that they're imposing upon? At what point do we as a society say, okay, we have to stand together, ideally in peace, and say no more? Otherwise, if we don't stand up, we get walked over, at least from what I've seen from history.
So I'm not sure where the question's coming from, because
well, I'm trying to get where you stand on that whole issue of
exercise your free will at any time. It doesn't matter if you're people start stepping on your toes. That doesn't mean you roll over, right? Right. So you don't roll over. I mean, you talk about the Nazis. I mean, somebody's being cruel. You take what you consider, based on your value system, whatever it is, appropriate action accordingly. So I'm not suggesting violence or nonviolence. I'm saying each individual needs to go within and figure out what's appropriate for them in that moment. And whether it's a group of people, I don't care how big the group of people is, it doesn't matter. It's each individual deciding whether or not that they want to be part and parcel of whatever that is. So if you talk,
I'm trying to see this in the larger context, because yes, it all comes down to what we do inside. Turn within. Yes.
But the second world, we talk about the second
we're
world.
looking at a world in which we have mass movements that are infringing on people's rights.
But let's talk
deciding
about
for them.
Let's use your example of this. Let's use your example of the Second World War. So you raised Hitler as an example.
Or any totalitarian philosophy.
It doesn't matter, whoever,
Doesn't matter
we're
which one.
using him as an example. So it's completely appropriate to rise up as a group and fight Hitler and the thinking and the cruelty that he was, that he was the titular head, we know. And there were all kinds of other factors that contributed, but we're just distilling this down to the simplistic right now. Okay, we know that, nobody, a lot of people's hands weren't clean here. But so there's no, it's not in conflict at all with free will.
Right, but I'm saying, at what point, what do we as a society do? Because if we all just sit around contemplating our navels, the jackboot rocks over us, is the way I've heard it expressed by others. So I mean, at what point, I do not hear you talking about merging the spirituality with politics. And I really believe that chasm needs to be crossed.
Yeah, I don't get into politics with people, but how people express their politics, that's between them and themselves. Because it all really distills down to an individual level. How that becomes socially mobilized, which is what you're talking about.
That's the way to talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not getting into that with people, because that to me, that's a minefield. I'm dealing with helping people on an individual level to make better choices. And then if they be based on their individual value system, which I don't get into because everybody has their individual value system. But when those individual value systems start to overlap, that's the overlap of the Venn diagram I talking about at the end, then that becomes a group because they have commonality.
Sure.
Okay, fine. And then they start mobilizing that in some way. My work is doing is getting people to think more clearly and to understand that the more selfish they are, the more cruel they are, the more insecure that tells them that they are. Now, for the people who are really clueless, like I said, that's a long road of self-realization. So let me you want to talk about 8 billion people? I'll tell you who my target audience is, okay? Out of the 8 billion, and I'm just going to throw a number at you, just to give you a ballpark idea, because I've run numbers. And so out of the 8 billion people on planet Earth, the 8 billion are not my target audience. My target audience are the more self-aware ones. And where do we draw the line here? I don't know. It's just a phrase I'm using, okay? It doesn't mean that they're more highly evolved. It means that people are going to be more self-reflective. That's all I mean by that. I never talk about higher or lower or evolution or development.
Yeah, for example, conscious creatives.
For example, they're a subgroup of this group who I'm interested in talking with and sharing ideas with, okay? So you're right. And so out of that 8 billion, I figure there's somewhere between, and this is just a number that I pulled out of thin air, but somewhat accurate, I think, somewhere around 10 to 50 million people. That's my target audience, okay? Now, Judy, you may think, wow, 10 to 50 million people, that's a lot of people. Well, a raw number.
How many of them read books?
What's that?
How many of them read books?
Well, no. But 10 to 50 million people sounds like a large number. Do the math and put 10 million or 50 million on the numerator and put the denominator 8 billion. And it works out to somewhere around 0.1%. A tenth or up maybe as much as 0.5% or something. I can't remember the exact. It's something.
I would generally go along with that.
It's like 1/10 of 1%.
Yeah, I mean, people. I love watching these TV shows, like Shark Tank, where they say, "Oh, here's the market. There's so many thousands or millions of people."
Yeah.
But we don't estimate the fact that they're just going to be that much.
Yeah. So anyway, that's why.
So anyway, I wanted to ask you about that, because a lot of my work is around taking that individual growth and individual awareness as much as I can evolve it. I don't remember 6,000 lifetimes, but my background is journalism, and I'm very socially conscious, and so a lot of my work is finding ways to bridge from that spiritual focus into the social focus. And I talk about practical spirituality, David Dida's term, or spiritual politics. That we need to I've seen there's the divide. The people that are into political stuff want nothing to do with spirituality, or almost nothing. People into spirituality want almost nothing to do with politics. It's dirty and ugly. But we need to merge the two if we're going to transform society, as far as I can tell.
Yes.
So that's where I'm coming from.
And gentlemen, can I just jump in here with a quote from Van Jones?
You get, and I'm done. Thank you.
It's in that convergence of spiritual people becoming active and active people becoming spiritual that the hope of humanity now rests.
Who said that? Is that Barbara?
Van Jones.
Van Jones.
Oh, Van Jones. Interesting. Cool.
Yeah. So there are lots of people thinking, and you're one of them, Judah, in that way. Look, I have memories being, helping humanity on a lot of different levels. Kathy knows over the last 6,000 years. I want to help on a very fundamental with ideational issues, so ideas, and to try to shift people's thinking in the way they're thinking about stuff fundamentally and foundationally, and then how that manifests in a social construct and so forth. There are other people who can give it lots of good thought on that. I'm staying focused on what I'm doing, but I appreciate what your thinking is, and I appreciate your question too. But your approach, I leave it to people like you. So, but yeah, the foundation to me is the ideas, and when the ideas are flawed down here, if you think of it as a V, and the ideas are flawed down here, and then they start getting misaligned and misaligned and misaligned, and then you start getting more and more people involved out here, then it turns into a big mess. And then so because this is where I'm working down here. This is much more complicated working up here, quite frankly. So I respect what you're saying. It's a big, when you're dealing with other people. Look, I have my professional work before I started doing this work full time, about 10 years ago. I was for 30 years in dispute resolution. I was in law firms, but I was also mediated about 500 cases. So I did group consensus work, and I did conflict resolution, mediation, which often got confused with meditation. They're not the same. Anyway, I can't tell you how many calls we used to get at my office, like, we're calling for meditation. Well, actually, I do teach that, but that's not what we're doing here. Anyway, so I understand consensus building. I used to teach consensus building at MIT, at Sloan, at the business school there, and so forth and so on, amongst other things. And so I get what you're talking about, and the need for it socially, absolutely. But my focus right now is on ideas. That's where I'm staying at that level, way down at the bottom of the V. Okay.
Thank you, Cal. So there is one more question, and then we are over time. So, but this is fantastic. Thank you. So Pamela, do you want to ask your question? I think you're
Yes. Hi, Kelvin. It is so nice to be here and hear you speak. I just know exactly where you're coming from. I just sense this deep connection. But I have a question that has to do with a quote from Jesus Christ. Let the children come to me, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And I understand that to mean back to a state of innocence and wholeness and non-judgment. And so the question is it possible to get to a higher state of being where we no longer need to forgive because we don't judge, we don't look at things from a separation perspective? And if that's the case, is this another level, another degree of forgiveness, perhaps?
Well, I think that's what I'm describing in my maybe not so articulate way, but that's what I'm describing is exactly what he's saying. If you're paraphrasing him in that way, yeah. But it's not a higher level. It's not higher. It's a clearer level, is what I would say. I don't like this. I don't use the word higher. You'll find in my book, I never use the word higher, because higher implies lower, it means better, it means lesser. I'm not into levels. And so it's clearer. I think and it also doesn't mean that it's just, for the people who've been working on it for so many thousands of years. No, anybody can have a clearer mind. That's what I mean when I say I'm working down here at the bottom of the V. It's helping people have a clearer mind. Then when you start getting into what Judah's talking about, the social manifestation of this, so forth, their clearer mind is going to be better at creating whatever social constructs to help move and change society, etc. But if the clarity ain't there, the social structure going to be a big mess. And to your point, in terms of forgiveness, that's exactly what Jesus is talking about when he says, love is accepting the other person for who they are, not who you wish they were. And now Jesus has been misquoted, about this whole turn the other cheek. He never said that, first of all. Number two, he talked explicitly about looking for snakes and wolves and so forth, and he's used different parables and different phrases to convey the idea that you have to have your eyes open. You always have to have your eyes open. So to your question, Pamela, the issue is you're kind of thinking that, there would be this kumbaya state where everybody is thinking in a non-selfish way, and then a place or a state where we wouldn't need forgiveness because there would be no discord. I would argue that there's always going to be discord to some degree. Can we lessen the discord? Absolutely, yes. Because discord is just a disagreement in the free will choices that somebody else makes. So it's nobody's going to choose all the same. God, that would be a boring place wherever whatever planet that would be. And even the people who are not thinking in a cruel way, the way I defined cruelty before, about trying to hurt somebody and getting pleasure out of it. I've done all kinds of stuff that my broad definition of cruelty have been cruel, and I did not intend to hurt the other person, and yet I was negligent. And so that level of cruelty is still cruelty, and that's going to cause discord, is what I'm saying when I say discord. And so that's just nobody's perfect. So this goes to what your question also goes to the whole notion that there's no such thing as perfection. There's no such thing as perfection, because perfection means static plateau, no growth anymore. And I think that's illogical, and it's certainly not my experience. So it's a great question, but I think that the way that I've tried to describe forgiveness is as good as it gets for us to use saving language, to save ourselves, right? Because that's what really matters in any situation. Okay, I don't know if that helps.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Pamela. Thank you. And Kel, we're going to have to wrap up. So I want to make sure that everyone has a way to contact you. And definitely, I highly recommend his new book. And I want to make sure that people realize that this is just such a small start to an introduction to someone who you could have days and days of delightful conversation with and blow your mind, because you'll start to see a different kind of path to clarity when you work with Kelvin.
Oh, thank you for sharing. Thank you for saying that, Kathy.
Sure.
So people can reach me just by Googling my name. You Google my name, Kelvin Chin. Just remember the L, Kevin with an L. You Google my name, and I have 4 websites. Probably the most appropriate one for this group, kelvinchin.org, kelvinchin.org. That's my more spiritually oriented website. And then you can go to the bottom of any of the 4 websites that I have, bottom page in the footer, and there's hot links to the other 3. So that way you don't have to remember what the other websites are called. Just remember my name.org. And my book website is there. My Overcoming the Fear of Death website is there. And my meditation website is there. So you just go into the bottom of any page on any of the websites. And then subscribe to my YouTube channel. There's 100 to 200 videos on my YouTube channel about all manner of topics, from meditation to the afterlife experiences, what it's like on the other side, you know, details about what happens after we die, and then like we talked about today, how to live life.
And the other thing I'd like to say as a wrap up is that Kelvin is the perfect example of the concept that you can be ascended in your previous lives and still come back to earth.
Kathy said that. Yes, that's Kathy's perception of me. That's not my self-perception.
Sounds pretty accurate. And Kelvin, would love to have you come back and talk about your book about death.
Okay, great, sure.
That will be really fascinating, and like to know about your near-death experience and going back and forth through the veil. We like that, don't we, Kathy?
Yes. Well, this is just such a joy, and thank you, Kelvin, for pre-recording since we weren't sure of the time. So
Right.
thank you all. Thank you. And thank you all for coming. Please share this recording on Facebook, and